Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I have to confess to you a big disappointment. I am old enough to remember all the way back to 1976. Yeah, it was a time when it seemed everybody was patriotic. Everyone had an American flag flying, and it didn't matter if you were a Republican or a Democrat, you were proud of our country. It seemed like everything had suddenly turned red, white, and blue. I mean, everything. I can remember how proud of our country I was, and that we had become such a great country in just 200 years. I can also remember thinking of how awesome it would be in 50 years when we would celebrate the nation's 250th birthday. Well, here we are, just weeks away from the 4th of July, and it is nothing like I had hoped it would be. There are so many things to celebrate. Things like how we were founded on godly principles, how we were set up with the government instructed to honor and support God-given rights and freedoms, how we have pulled so many out of poverty and created so much wealth and destroyed any caste type system, how we have maintained a system where everyone can have a say in who leads us, how everyone has the same opportunities. I mean, I could go on and on. And that leads me to this article from a guy who is, well, almost exactly the same age as I am, and how he remembers things. His name is Bradley Burtzer. He writes for the Daily Wire, and he's also a professor of history at Hillsdale College. And he says, my memories of the summer of 1976 are those of an 8-year-old. 50 years later, a few things might be hazy in my brain and in my soul, but as a trained historian, I think I have plenty good grasp of what happened then. I do remember that there were plenty of things to be unpatriotic about. There was serious inflation. I even wrote a letter to President Gerald Ford complaining about this, he said. And serious unemployment. We were also in the middle of an energy crisis, though the gas lines had subsided. Some importantly, though, we had been solidly defeated politically, if not militarily, in Vietnam. Some of my earliest political and world memories revolve around, first, Watergate. He says, my mother, a Goldwater Republican, was deeply upset. And second, by the evacuation of Saigon. Etched in my memory are the American helicopters fleeing the city as the VC and NVA closed in. Women were literally throwing their babies into the departing aircraft. To this day, I have nightmares about April 30th, 1975. It was truly the very image of defeat and desperation. Had we ever looked so bad on the world stage? I'm not sure. And that's a lot for a 7-year-old to process. Though I had been born in Great Bend, Kansas, in 1967, we had moved to the extremely middle-class and comfortable town of Hutchinson, Kansas, in the summer of 1974. Hutch, as we all called it, was famous for two things. First, we had the world's second largest grain elevator at just over a half mile, featured in the famous movie Picnic. The Soviets, damn them, had built one a few inches longer just to spite us. And second, we had some of the largest salt mines in the world. If memory serves, There are bigger ones in Ontario, but the Hutch mines are large. What I remember most, though, is that we spent 1976 celebrating in the most beautiful ways. It was glorious. Indeed, my memories of the patriotism of that summer in Hutchinson are so strong that they almost wipe out the memories of Watergate and the fall of Saigon. As I just mentioned, Hutch was a very comfortable and middle class town. It was also deeply conservative and anti communist. While I have no doubt there were Democrats in town, most folks were Republicans or libertarians. I must also note that my town seemed to have been filled with World War II and Korean War veterans. My older brothers and I had a lawn mowing business, and it seemed that all of our clients had proudly served. Though the vets were modest about their service, we kids would beg the vets to show us their wounds from the war, and the vets, somewhat surprisingly, complied. I remember especially Mr. Bruce Huey, who had taken machine gun fire all across his back. Of course, as a kid, I loved it. I also remember Mr. Reinhard, one of the most dignified men I ever knew, who had been stationed in Hiroshima after the dropping of the bomb. He fought cancer 3 times after, finally succumbing at the age of 94. It's hard for us in 2026 to understand or envision, but almost every male community leader had served. They shaped our very neighborhoods and communities, and they did so with a calm and stoic dignity. My memory is that we Kansans simply didn't care if America was experiencing economic problems, corruption in Washington, D.C., or a failure abroad. What we cared about was that America had given us shelter to have a meaningful and true community. For all intents and purposes, that summer, Hutch was a little city-state, a proud member of the American Republic. We wanted to celebrate that. 3 things stick out in my memory. First, we kids got to paint all of the town's fire hydrants as our favorite patriots. I was already a huge fan of Ben Franklin because of the book Ben and Me, but my older brother Todd and I decided to paint our local hydrant as Betsy Ross. And for some reason, we chose to paint her in a yellow dress. I can see it so well in my mind's eye. And second, I remember our neighborhood, known in our town as Countryside West. And it had days and days of celebration. It was a little festival in our neighborhood. The neighbors dressed as patriots and as Uncle Sam. One neighbor, the father of a beloved friend, even walked around reciting the Declaration of Independence. So we had hot dogs, fireworks, spontaneous orations. If any of this sounds corny, we certainly didn't think so. We were doing our best to thank those who had come before us, and we were dedicating ourselves to a future based on the principles of the Declaration. And after all, what nation can claim its origin with these words? Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," unquote. And this wasn't cheesy or corny. This was something that gave us immense pride. And we felt the need to express our deep patriotism. And third, Hutch is the home of Kansas State Fair. I'll never forget the firework display that year. The town and the fair had always gone a bit overboard every 4th of July, but this one was simply over the top. We took our blankets, laid down on the fairground lawn, and listened to the loudspeakers, blaring Song for America by our native sons, the band Kansas, and Sweet Madam Blue by Styx. Interestingly enough, the Kansas song is somewhat anti-patriotic, but we didn't know that at the time. We just knew that it was about America, and we loved it. As we approach America 250, I worry profoundly about the future of America. Neither major party is exactly in leadership position, and we're more polarized as an American people than we have ever been in our history, outside of 1861 to 1865. Our so-called political leaders can't even regulate their own lives, and they're certainly not models of moral clarity and integrity. And yet, when it comes to power, they're each imperialists and greedy and abusive. Truly, to look to the political realm is to be depressed. And then add in the immense debt burden, and perhaps even more tragically, the outrageous level of fraud, upwards of $500 billion a year by the government's own accounting. Plus the calls to pack the Supreme Court and undo the Electoral College. We should be immensely worried about the future of our republic. And yet, we hold these truths is still the greatest sentence ever written, outside of Scripture, of course. The American Republic still exists after 250 years, surviving wars at home and abroad. I am reminded of the brilliant Anglo-Irish statesman Edmund Burke, who told us, quote, "We are therefore never authorized to abandon our country to its fate, or to act or advise as if it had no resource. There is no reason to apprehend, because ordinary means threaten to fail, that no others can spring up. Whilst our heart is whole, it will find means or make them. The heart of the citizen is a perennial spring of energy to the state, because the pulse seems to intermit. We must not presume that it will cease instantly to beat. The public must never be regarded as incurable." Amen. And happy 250th birthday, America. Maybe 1976 and Hutchinson, Kansas still provide us with sound lessons for what to do, what to celebrate, and how to be unembarrassed patriots. But I would say that bicentennial time, it's not today, unfortunately. We can see that actually from some YouGov statistics. A new national survey has found that 38% of Democrats say they are ashamed to be Americans, highlighting a sharp divide in how different political groups view the country just weeks before the United States turns 250. The Economist YouGov survey conducted between June 13th and June 15th found that while 38% of Democrats describe themselves as ashamed to be Americans, that's 38%, that's over a third. 60% of U.S. adult citizens overall said that they were either very proud or somewhat proud of their country. The survey found notable differences between Democrats and the larger population when respondents were asked how proud they were to be Americans. Among all U.S. adult citizens, 42% said they were very proud to be American, while another 18% said they were somewhat proud. Combined that That means that 60% expressed some level of pride in the country. And by contrast, only 40% of Democrats said they were at least somewhat proud to be Americans. That's a big gap. Meanwhile, 38% of Democrats reported feeling ashamed of being American. Of that group, 12% said they were very ashamed, while the remainder described themselves as somewhat ashamed. Another 22%, almost a quarter of Democrats, said they were neither proud nor ashamed, closely mirroring the 20% of all adults who selected a neutral response. And respondents were also asked how the United States compares to other countries around the world. This ought to be interesting, right? Nearly half of Democrats, 45%, said America compares poorly with other nations. That figure included 25% who called the country worse than average, 14% who described it as among the worst, and 6% who said it was the worst country in the world. Among all U.S. citizens, however, 54% said America was either the greatest country in the world or among the greatest country or better than average country. So in looking at this survey and others, we see that Republicans have not really changed a whole lot. When you look down through the years, they haven't really changed a lot. The numbers are very similar in how patriotic they are. But the Democratic Party has really moved toward being embarrassed of our country. And why? I mean, that's what goes through my mind. It goes through my brain. Why? Why would someone now be proud or not be proud, to be an American? I believe that it comes down to education. Many on the left are just indoctrinated to believe that we are a terrible society. We are systemically bad and racist. We are greedy and don't care about the poor and all that kind of stuff, right? They literally believe this stuff. But in reality, of course, the opposite's true. Our founding fathers understood human nature like nobody's business. They created a free market system that is the greatest system in the world. Well, greatest system the world's ever known. Is it perfect? No. But it is the best that we've ever seen. They did all of this with Christian principles and advanced these ideas because of the Bible. In fact, Christianity has been behind all the major reforms that we've seen. All of them. In fact, John Wilsey, he writes for First Liberty. He says, everywhere we look, we see confidence in the American experience on the wane. A Wall Street Journal NORC poll found that patriotism has declined among Americans from 70% to 38% since 1997. Part of the explanation for that alarming trend is how the left creates a narrative that America is inherently a racist and oppressive nation. Furthermore, that narrative has asserted that Christianity is a harmful religion, creating division, violence, misogyny, and justifying slavery. The only explanation for any freedom or equality in American history is found in those who went against Christianity to advance liberal ideas. But Christians have been at the center of the greatest reform efforts in human history. And many of those reform efforts originated or took place in the United States of America. Yeah, the US of A. Reforming Christians were behind all the major moral improvement movements since the 17th century. Anti-slavery, women's rights, literacy, temperance, and civil rights, just to name a few. American Christians have always based their reforming efforts on their Christian faith. Contrary to what some recent scholars have argued, Christians and Christianity have been indispensable to the achievement of the cause of freedom and equality, not just in America, but actually throughout the world. While Christians have at times sought to use the Bible to justify slavery, and I use the word Christians loosely here, the oppression of Native Americans, the persecution of Catholics, and other unjust causes, these negative examples do not serve as evidence that Christianity as a faith system is inherently oppressive. The historical evidence demonstrates conclusively that Christians in America have led the way for 400 years in the cause of liberty for all. It is refreshing to see a scholar with the credibility, the eloquence, the research skills, such as Mark David Hall, making that very argument. This recent book of his, Proclaim Liberty Throughout All the Land, how Christianity has advanced freedom and equality for all Americans, is one of the great value in our contemporary culture. Conservatives often find themselves perplexed by the flood of books and articles on the left that seek to undermine the American project of self-government under just law. And Hall has given us in a book of 7 chapters, an introduction and a conclusion, a definitive answer to the leftist anti-American and anti-Christian narrative. Starting with the Puritans, moving through American history to the Revolution, the Constitutional Convention, Hall argues that Christians and Christian ideas dating back to the Reformation stress the dignity of the individual person and the ability of the individual to assess the gospel for themselves in the Bible. That revolutionary idea from the Reformation was one of the central influences for idea of self-government under just law. The Puritans inherited Reformation theology and planted it in the New England, where they grew and flourished through the period of the Revolution. And Hall argues that the Protestant Christianity was at the heart of the first successful Republican government in the modern age. Hall continues his argument in the context of the slavery, the Reformation, the Reform movement of the 19th century, and how religious liberty forms the basis for all other liberties that we enjoy as Americans. Strict separation of church and state was never the intention of the founders, because they realized that religious practice and expression were central to the coherence and the flourishing of a just society. So, hearing this, it brings us to really our last question of the day. Why was the Declaration of Independence so important? Well, we look to Americans for Prosperity, and they write, America's 250th anniversary presents a rare opportunity to revisit the ideas that launched the great American experiment and consider what they mean for our future. Across the country, Americans are debating issues that touch nearly every aspect of our lives, from affordability and economic opportunity to free speech, civic responsibility, and the proper role of government. The questions facing our country are significant. In many ways, they're the same questions America's founders wrestled with nearly 250 years ago. Understanding how they answered them can help us think more clearly about the challenges that we face today. That's one reason that we are encouraging Americans to do something surprisingly simple. Read the Declaration of Independence. It's not long. As we prepare to commemorate America's 250th birthday, there's no better time to revisit the document that launched our nation. The Declaration isn't just a piece of history, but a statement of principles and a bold argument about human dignity, freedom, and self-government that continues to shape our national conversation today. Most Americans remember the Declaration of Independence as the document that announced America's separation from Great Britain. It was also so much more, though. Written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration is a blueprint for self-government. It laid out the principles that would be, they would guide the American experiment and define the relationship between citizens and government. And importantly, it argued three things: that all people are created equal, they possess inherent rights, and the government derives its authority from the consent of the people. That's where the government gets its authority from, the consent of the people. Those ideas helped shape a new nation. Nearly 250 years later, they continue to influence how Americans think about freedom, opportunity, citizenship, and the proper role of government. The Declaration may not provide a direct answer to every challenge facing the country today, but it offers insight into the principles that have guided America since its founding and shaped the debates that will define its future. The ideas that made the American dream possible, the principles outlined in the Declaration, helped create the conditions for generations of Americans to pursue better lives. The idea that individuals should be free to build, create, innovate, and pursue their own aspirations has fueled extraordinary progress over the last 250 years. From entrepreneurs starting businesses to families building communities, generations of Americans have used their freedom to pursue their own version of the American dream. Those principles helped make the American dream possible. They continue to inspire people seeking the freedom to chart their own course and build a better future for themselves and their families for generations to come. America's 250th anniversary is a moment to look back, but also to look forward. Every generation inherits the responsibility to preserve and strengthen the principles they have made freedom and opportunity possible. The questions facing our country today may look different from, those of 1776. But the challenge remains the same: how to build a society. How to build a society where individuals are free to pursue their dreams, contribute to their communities, and govern themselves, all while embracing different religions and ways of life. The Declaration of Independence offers a reminder of the principles that launched that experiment nearly 250 years ago. As America prepares to celebrate this milestone, take a few moments to read the Declaration yourself, will you? Consider the ideas it contains, the nation those ideas helped build, and the role each of us can play in shaping America's next chapter. So, with that in mind, let me just simply conclude with this. I live near Fort Vancouver in Vancouver, Washington. It wasn't that many years ago that Fort Vancouver had the largest 4th of July fireworks display west of the Mississippi. Today, on our nation's 250th birthday, they won't have a fireworks display at all. In fact, the city of Vancouver has banned the sale and use of fireworks. And the Fort of Vancouver will not even have a flag-raising ceremony. They told all the American Heritage girls that it was canceled and they would not be needed this year. This is just one example of how the rot in our educational system is affecting our country. Liberals no longer feel any sense of pride in America. They have let Trump derangement syndrome affect how we celebrate the greatest nation the world has ever known. And that is disappointing. I would like to hear what you think about it. Because for me, I was looking forward to my children being able to go through what I went through in 1976. And maybe on a greater scale, because it's 250. But they won't. It won't happen. I would like to hear from you, maybe why you think that it's not really a big thing today and what you think about it. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Of course, you can go to our YouTube channel and comment and listen there. And thank you for listening. This podcast is a